another one that requires niacin. Here's another one that requires niacin, anthogenic acid, vitamin. All right. So, and this is the TCA cycle, the Krebs cycle, glycolysis. So these pathways will not function without the vitamins. Here they are. We're going to start with folic acid. All right. This is where I always come down to, do you need to memorize B1, B2, B3? Based on what I've seen, yeah. Like some of the board's questions would be like, which is vitamin B1? And I just hate this question. But yeah, you could get a question, which vitamin is vitamin B1? And you got to know vitamin B1 is thiamine. It's called B1 because it's the first one discovered. So I don't care though. The only one I remember is B12, B1. Those are the only two that I remember on a regular basis. All the others I end up looking up if I have to. So, you guys want to memorize them now, or do you want to wait and memorize them for the board? All right, here you go. I'll have at least one question on one of these two. Yeah, so make sure you know which ones are B1 and B12. So there you go. And we are going to start with the first one that was discovered, which was, no, we're not starting with the first one that was discovered. We're starting with folate. This was B9, I remember that too. But yeah, I'll have one question. I'm giving you one question on the exam. It's either going to be asking you about B12 or B1. Which one is which? So B1, thiamine. B12 is cobalamin, which is also known as vitamin B12. We tend to call it vitamin B12 instead of cobalamin. So again, with these, the first thing we're going to focus on is the function. What is the role of that vitamin in the body? This one is huge because it really is needed for DNA synthesis. So folate does carbon transfer, I have this somewhere, reactions. So you basically, it's in reactions or enzymes that need to do carbon transfers. So another word for carbon, we often use methyl groups. So this CH3, this is just a methyl group. And so typically we're moving methyl groups around, which means we're moving carbons around. That's what folate is doing. It's moving carbons around, specifically methyl groups. And methyl groups are CH3, so we're just moving carbons around. And you need this. You have to have this for DNA synthesis. So there's different parts of your DNA that you're going to be learning later are your pyrimidines and your purines. Both of those need folate to be synthesized. You can't make new DNA without folate. And you're going to see why you're going to have the complications you do if you don't have enough folate in your diet. So cells that are turned over regularly, do you guys know what I mean by turned over? They're rapidly, they're rapidly destroyed and remade. So cells that are turned over, anything that's turned over regularly means that it's rapidly destroyed and resynthesized. Destroyed, resynthesized, destroyed, resynthesized. That's what turned over means. So your cells that are regularly turned over, destroyed, and remade are skin cells. So your skin cells are the first defense against UV light, against any toxins that might come at you, diseases that are viruses. And so you need to keep the skin healthy. And so it's going to be constantly replicated. You're going to make new skin cells, red blood cells. How often do you turn over red blood cells? Every, how many days? 120 days. Every 120 days, that red blood cell dies. And so right now, you're making millions of new red blood cells right now because you're having millions of new old red blood cells that are being turned over. So your red blood cells are constantly being turned over and cells of the GI tract. I mentioned in GI tract, that's getting toxins too. So the foods that you eat, the first line of defense are your intestinal cells. And so they're rapidly degraded and resynthesized too. So every week, you have a new set of intestinal cells. The reason this is important is because when you make a new cell, what's the first thing you're going to have to do to copy that cell? You you have to copy the DNA. And when you replicate the DNA, you gotta have folate. So if you have a folate deficiency, then that's gonna affect your ability to make these new cells. So folate deficiency is going to result in skin issues, GI issues, but most obvious, it's gonna result in anemia. So you will not be able to make new red blood cells, which means you can't transport oxygen, and that's the major complication when it comes to adults and folate. Well, that and pregnancy, which I'm gonna talk about in a second here, because you can imagine if you're growing a new fetus in your belly, you need folate as well, because you're rapidly dividing new cells to make to develop that infant, that fetus. All right. So folic acid, by the way, folate versus folic acid. It's probably good that you know the difference. Folate refers to naturally occurring forms. Folic acid is synthetic. We make it. We can make it and put it into supplements. And so food items, we'll talk about bread, are supplemented with folate. And we fortify with folate because we were getting neural tube defects in pregnant women who were having infants with neural tube defects related to folate deficiency. So in the 90s, we started a folate supplement program where if you look at pasta nowadays, if you look at breads, they're all now supplemented with folate. And that's because we were having increasing rates of women having infants with neural tube defects due to a folate deficiency. And so now you can't really find pasta anymore that doesn't have folate added to it. I mean, you can, but the government started that supplement program, so most food companies are on board in doing that, adding folate to food. So when you see folic acid, it's the same thing, it's just the synthetic form of folate, but both of them work in the body, so it doesn't matter which one you have, folate or folic acid, they both do the same function, which is transfer methyl groups. They do one carbon metabolism. That is their main role. This is what they do. One carbon metabolism. They help enzymes transfer methyl groups. They help enzymes transfer methyl groups. And you need it for DNA. So DNA, also some amino acids, you can't make methionine from homocysteine without folate. The DNA is the big one. Thymidine monophosphate is just one of the nucleotides of DNA. And this is the scientific form of it, the physical form that's in your body. This, I do want you to know, tetrahydrofolate, THF. When we get folate in the body, whether it's folic acid or folate, our body converts it into THF, tetrahydrofolate. And this is the one that actually is doing the one carbon metabolism. So when you ever see THF, it's just folate in the molecular form it needs to be in the body to do its function. Yeah.
Have you heard of maybe anyone having impaired health from taking the primarily the synthetic form of vitamin B9 because of folate?
No.
I
mean, I'd be curious about that if you have seen it, if you talk to, I don't know if we have time during class to talk about it, but I would definitely be curious about it.
I'll just say it relates to that THF argument, and
I mean, I'm wondering, like, I don't know, we're gonna have to sit down and talk about that, Jack, because I would want to, like, actually look at that. Yeah, I mean, I would say that it might depend on how much of it, like, it is in the body versus the stuff that in the supplemental program, the one that we put in food and pasta, it's not that much. It's not so much where I think it's problematic. And from what I can tell, it has lowered the amount of neural tube defects. We definitely had a decrease in those. So, and I also, guys, I think about nutrition this way. There's benefit versus risk. Everything I think is this way. There's always benefit and risk, and you just have to walk that line. So I see the supplemental program as being a benefit, but yeah, does that risk? The thing is, there actually isn't a folate toxicity. So too much folate isn't bad for you, but the wrong time, I I'm actually curious as to how that can happen, or what that looks like. Okay, I'm gonna have to move on.
I think it has to do that cycle you showed us, like,
And I'm gonna show that again. But that's still, you still take folic acid and folate and turn it into tetrahydrofolate. Either way,
I think you might have to do like transition conversion.
okay.
Not sure.
Oh. All right, I have to look at that again. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Sort of. But I also, like, yeah, I'll have to look at that pathway. It's been a long time since I've looked at that. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Okay. I will definitely be looking at that. Because tetrahydrofolate is methylated and sometimes non-methylated. So when it's doing its function, helping transfer methyl groups, it becomes methylated. And then it loses its methyl group when it does its function, and then it has to be remethylated to do its function again. What does its remethylation is actually going to be vitamin B12. And so I'm trying to remember what that gene does. And I can't, so I'm going to move on. But this is tetrahydrofolate. So notice it is the tetrahydrofolic acid, or tetrahydrofolate, whichever one you want to call it. When it is in its functional form, it's going to be transferring methyl groups. So when it transfers the methyl groups, it becomes unmethylated and has to be remethylated again. The vitamin that's going to remethylate it is going to be vitamin B12. So I'll talk about that when we get to B12. But you need this to make DNA. So purine nucleotides are for your DNA. Thymidine monophosphate is a direct way of making, it's still one of your nucleotides, so we're still talking about DNA here. I don't care if you remember thymidine monophosphate. This is just one of your nucleotides of your DNA. And then this pathway here, this is the one that we just saw last week when we were talking about methionine turning into homocysteine. So if we want to take homocysteine and remake methionine, we need folate in the tetrahydrofolate form, because it's going to remethylate methionine so that it can do its job again to make more S-adenosyl methionine, which is SAM. Yes. THF can be methylated or non-methylated. I don't want you to worry about which is which. It's either methylated THF or non-methylated. When it's doing, so either way in the body, folate, its scientific term in the body is tetrahydrofolate. And tetrahydrofolate sometimes has a methyl group attached to it when it's doing its function. When it gives its methyl group away, it has to be recycled, meaning it has to be given another methyl group. But it's always going to be methylated. If it's trapped, and that can happen when folate becomes trapped in its methylated form, it's no longer functional. It can't give away its methyl group when it becomes trapped. So here's the production. Don't memorize, by the way, guys, you're not going to memorize anything other than, like, all these enzymes. I don't even care if you know that it means NADPH. What I want you to know is this. We need it to make DNA, and we need it to remake, okay, let me try to write this. Remake methionine from homocysteine. If you remember that from last week, we needed it to remake methionine from homocysteine. And THF. THF is its scientific name in the body. Tetrahydrofolate. Does all of those. It makes your DNA. The two main functions I really want you to remember is one, it makes DNA. You can't make DNA without tetrahydrofolate. You can't make your nucleotides without it. And two, I want you to remember that we need folate to recycle and remake methionine from homocysteine. Those are the two main functions. Make the nucleotides for DNA and to recycle methionine from homocysteine. So that's its function. Now we want to talk about what happens if you don't have enough or when you have too much. So Nutritional anemias, to start out with, because we're going to talk about a few different types of anemias, because some vitamins, the lack of these vitamins will cause, or mineral will cause anemia. Anemia is just an umbrella term that means you're not properly transporting oxygen. Anemia simply means you're not properly transporting oxygen. And there's iron deficiency anemia, there's B12 deficiency anemia, there's folate deficiency anemia, there's lots of different types of anemias. And they're classified by a few things. One, dependent on the vitamin that they're deficient in. The two, the mean corpuscular volume. What is that? So this is basically when you take the volume, like if you were to take someone's blood and spin it down, you would have a volume of blood cells. So someone who is anemic, depending on their type of anemia, will have a different volume of blood cells. Someone who's folate deficient will have macrocytic anemia. So they're going to have really big red blood cells. And I'm going to tell you why that they do. It's also called megaloblastic. Darn it, I really wanted to finish these next two slides, but we will take a break. All right, so I did type quickly on the board. Did you guys get that number? What was it? 8804. If you didn't get it, you should still be open. So 8804, you guys have 10 minutes, and hopefully that'll be relaxed by 10 minutes.
Can we go for a walk? I will. You said 8804. What are you doing? Just having some people do.
So the gene that makes
Good, how are you? Oh, how'd you know? Wait, Harry, all up, man? As quickly as it's taking forever. Yeah, I don't know what it's doing. It won't load. Bro, that's so like annoying.
That's an awful lot of coffee buttons.
I was like the word.
So you don't call.
Huh? What are you gonna buy me?
I could have said worse things.
I guess for you.
Huh? Yeah, don't go for it.
I'll do the Wi-Fi. That's hard to think.
I'm slow to engage.
It's out.
It kind of looks like it almost rained.
How's it hot?
Just pop up top. No. Yeah, sure, there. That goes. See if that's still fits. Yes, it will. Yeah, there you go. That wasn't even mine. Oops. Still plugged in. Get a little 10-minute charge. Do it good. Wi-Fi's out?
Yeah.
Is that why that happened?
You know what? The vitamin stuff? No, I just I actually think folate is needed for DNA synthesis. It transfers methyl groups.
What happens if you become deficient in folate?
Skin, red blood cells, something like that.
Anemia.
Anemia, yeah. I'm gonna write that down. Anemia. It's a big word like mayonnaise. Anemia. That was my backup. Yeah, I'm trying to improve my IQ. I'm trying to think 2 steps ahead of people. Brady, do you want to buy me a $7,000 laser? It's like $5,000. I asked my grandmother, I was like, would you buy pay 5,000 of it? And everybody else can split the two grand? She's like, The thing is Gracie has it and my sister has it. So like 2 people have pots. So my dad's like, oh, there'll be new technology come out. It still works. Like I can still use that. I try to be nice. Anyway, I was trying to be nice and stuff. The thing is, I'm not taking business advice from people that weren't successful in business. You know what I mean? Like, my mom's a school teacher, and my dad worked at Wrigley. And now he works at Northrop Grumman with missiles and shit. So, both of them have no experience. So, I'm going to listen to someone that actually has done it. Hey, I was going to pickle. Are you going to pickle? Tonight? Yeah, I think that's what I'm doing.
At what time?
I have to go up. So what time's club at? 6:37?
I'm so I need to get a good sleep.
I was tired yesterday and everybody was out there. I was
You should have stuck it over for another 10 minutes because after that you would have been playing the whole time.
really.
Like Kat and I ended up playing probably like 6 or 7 times.
I wasn't like really wanting to play either. It just kind of came out there. You know?
Every time I go to tennis and come back to pickle, stop. Tennis gets that form, gets that curl.
Always now.
Okay, how many of those games have you won? Yeah. Are they good? Like the people you're playing?
They're about level.
Your level?
Yeah. How did this guy do this? Like I could take right there, but I'm not going to. He moves that horse. That's what he did. So, well, we got work to do.
Well, how are you doing today?
Yeah, it could be better. I was so you remember that little lingering cough I had?
Oh yeah, stay away from me then.
No. Whatever I had, it's just that whatever lingering cough. It was like itchy.
That's
So like every time I was
That's the worst.
so I'm not taking the moment. I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
I need to know everything about nutritional needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, at least you're here, bro. Well, I agree.
I feel like this makes my IQ better.
I bet it does, honestly.
Chess?
Yeah.
Yeah, like just like continuously playing.
It's just problem solving.
I'll play in a minute. I'm playing somebody.
Oh, yeah. That's good. First time meeting him, you know that group thing, he's like, I'll make a killer eggplant farm. I was like, this guy's gonna be the man.
Yeah. He's a good guy.
So you can take my plate right here. Can't take. But I can also reach. If I go right here, you can take.
I know.
You guys see,
Body's not functioning properly. Come see me. Come see me.
30? That's good, he deserves it. I mean, he's old, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
no, I heard that's in the last one.
You see Kelsey, like,
Never been interested.
I'm not even a Kelsey fan, though.
I didn't mind him. A little too much. Why is 10 just like, all these quizzes for micro have been like looking good. Like, I can just memorize the answers and small people. Now all of a sudden it's. Get in there.
The CPU I'm playing against is being so defensive for a CPU.
Yeah, I like our schedule.
Dingus.
It's gonna be kind of rough. It's not an easy schedule.
It's text. Yeah, that's a tough one.
I mean, we have like the first like few weeks, but our packs were.
FC State's alright. Vanderbilt.
I mean, SC were.
Missouri's gonna be a real rough game. Kentucky's a good game. That's a good game. Boomer's, I think Oklahoma, South Carolina is a good matchup.
Yeah, dude.
Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Coastal free. Yeah, that's a tough schedule.
Unfortunately, because I'm going to give you more information than you have to memorize, and you're going to take these things. Try to make that stuff. Alright, so where we left off is talking about blood cell volume. So if you take someone's blood and measure the volume of blood cells, you get an idea of not just how many blood cells there are, but how big those blood cells are. So red blood cells should be a certain size. If they're really large, megaloblastic, then that tells you there's some sort of deficiency going on. And I'm going to show you, here's the picture. Megaloblastic. Essentially, when you make new blood cells, you got to make your DNA, right? And if you don't have folate, you can't properly make DNA, which means these cells become. So here's megaloblastic, and here's macrocytic, and here's what normal red blood cells should look like. So this is normal. This is megaloblastic. What happened here is if you don't have folate, you don't properly replicate your cells, and so they become stunted. They become stunted at a really big size. That's why it's called megaloblastic anemia or macrocytic. They both mean the same thing, so I can call it either way on the Iron. So iron we call macrocytic. So you need to be able to tell the difference between iron, which is macrocytic, we'll talk about minerals later. It makes tiny red blood cells because if you don't have iron, you don't properly make hemoglobin. And when you don't properly make hemoglobin, then these guys are not filled with enough hemoglobin. So they're going to be really pale and small. And that's due to an iron deficiency anemia. But we're talking about folate deficiency. Folate means you can't make DNA. When you can't make DNA, these guys become stunted or megaloblastic. They become really large. And so they're going to have this really high macrocytic, high lean corpuscular volume. Essentially means the red blood cells are really big. They're going to have a really large volume. And that, as a doctor, if you're looking at something like that, they have a large lean corpuscular volume, it may mean that they have a folate or B12 deficiency. We'll get to B12 deficiency as well. It also will result in megaloblastic anemia, and that is because you need B12 to recycle folate. I'm going to write that. You need B12 cobalamin to recycle folate. And you're going to see that's going to be a major function of B12. So if you do not have folate, you can end up with megaloblastic anemia. If you don't have B12, you can end up with megaloblastic anemia. So both of those can result in it, but they're all relating to folate. So folate is the real deal here. It's because you're not properly able to make DNA, which means your red blood cells cannot properly divide into normal red blood cells. And so you will be anemic, which means you just aren't properly transporting oxygen. That's all anemia means. You're not properly transporting oxygen where it needs to go. And that makes a person tired and fatigued. So someone with anemia is just, they may be pale, may be tired, weak, and they can have more severe issues depending on how bad the anemia is. So here's megaloblastic. You can look at it under the microscope. This is what they, I'm circling with white blood cells. So these are your red blood cells, these guys. And these are normal size. Versus megaloblastic, you're going to have not just your red blood cells are going to be larger, but also your white blood cells are going to be larger. So the purple ones are your white blood cells. So they're going to be not just your red blood cells, but white blood cells will be huge because they also need DNA to be made, and they will be stunted as well. No, iron deficiency will make them really tiny because you can't make enough hemoglobin without iron, which means these guys don't have a lot of iron in them. They're really small. So yeah, iron deficiency, if you look at them under the microscope, you can tell someone's iron deficient because the red blood cells are really tiny compared to normal. So this is normal size. This is iron deficiency size. You should be making the same number, I want to say. But having said that, you should definitely have a different number. Either way, you're not going to make enough that are properly transported oxygen. All right, so folate deficiency. The major, there's going to be two major deficiencies. The first one is macrocytic anemia, also known as megaloblastic. It's the same thing. Sometimes we call it megaloblastic, sometimes macrocytic, but mega means macro big. Blood cells have to be produced daily. Right now, you're making billions, not billions, but probably millions of red blood cells just this minute alone, and you need folate to do that. So folate deficiency means DNA cannot be replicated, which means no new red blood cells. Cells get bigger, they don't split into two. Basically, they're stunted. So red cells cannot adequately transport oxygen. That's what anemia means. So anemia means blood cells cannot adequately transport oxygen. This is another consequence. So folate deficiency, megaloblastic anemia. The other concern is pregnancy. So folate deficiency during pregnancy, crucial role in pregnancy. DNA. How are you going to make a new human without being able to anencephaly, which means the brain does not form. And so to avoid these defects, folate fortification started in the 90s. So all your pastas and your breads, and this showed to significantly reduce birth defects related to folate deficiency. So it helps bring people back up to an appropriate level. Do you need to eat and take these folate supplements? Not necessarily. Hopefully, a nutritious diet will provide it. But they don't put a lot in these foods, so there's no concern for toxicity because there's really no known toxicity with folate. And by the way, whenever I talk about toxicity, when you Google nutrition questions, you get so many answers, and everything is going to be toxic in walking doses. So when I say that there's no known toxicity, I mean that typically with supplements taking various amounts, we just haven't seen toxicity. If you sat down and shoveled a bunch of folate in your mouth, at some point you may have toxic levels. But generally speaking, and so I'm sure if you Google toxicity of folate, I'm sure someone did a rat study or someone did a human study, somebody did something where you're going to see folate toxicity. But generally speaking, we don't see folate toxicity. But we do have a UL. This means the upper tolerable level, or like I call it the upper limit. The reason when we have a UL, and don't memorize this number, I don't care if you know what these numbers are. Just know that it has a UL because too much supplementing of folate will mask a B12 deficiency. And you don't want to do this because B12 deficiency, and that's the reason you have megaloblastic anemia, and if you give someone folate, you will get rid of the anemia. But you won't get rid of the real problem, which is the B12 deficiency. And without B12, you will have neurological issues. And that's a problem too. So that's why you don't want to take too much folate, because if you do, it might mask a B12 deficiency of neurological issues. This happened with my mother. My grandfather, her father died, and she just was going nuts for a little while. And we kind of ignored it. And then it turned out that because her father died, within a couple of months, she did go to the doctor, and it turned out she had a really significant B12 deficiency, and her dementia-like symptoms and her odd behavior was related to that. We gave her back B12, and she normalized. But those neurological problems can become irreversible. So that's why you don't want to mask the B12 deficiency, because yes, you can get anemia, and that can resolve, but the neurological condition may not. So let's talk about B12 and what it does. So this is the official name, or the scientific name, cobalamin. So you should recognize B12 or cobalamin as B12. The reason it's called cobalamin is because it contains the element cobalt. Here are its functions. So I always start out with what's the function of that vitamin? Why do we need it? It's needed for, mostly amino acid metabolism to remethylate, to make methionine from homocysteine. Remember, we needed both folate and B12. To make homocysteine into cysteine, you need B6. So we'll talk about that when we get to B6. But you need folate and B12 in order to recycle methionine, in order to make methionine from homocysteine. You also need B12. So again, B12 recycles folate. So without B12, you can't make DNA either. So folate is so important. But without B12, you can't recycle it. So if you give someone supplements of folate, then you'll be able to make DNA. But this is the problem right here, because this is the non-folate function of B12. It is needed for healthy nervous tissue. Honestly, I don't ask you specifically about what it does, except it's needed for healthy nervous tissue. That's what I want you to remember. Here's why it's needed for healthy nervous tissue. You have to make, in order to, remember propionyl CoA? I don't know if you remember, but during degradation of converted into succinyl-CoA. But you can, so it allows you to break down these fatty acids. If you can't degrade these fatty acids, then they can accumulate. Accumulation of anything is not good. And so you need it to break down the propionyl-CoA. And you also, so if you don't do it, you will have accumulation of unusual branched fatty acids, and that's how you get the neurological issues. So do know that we need B12 to recycle folate. So everything that folate does, you need B12 to help it. It's going to be the one that gives back enough of folate so that folate can do its job again. So every time folate donates enough of group, it has to be remethylated. What's the vitamin that remethylates it? It's B12. So without B12, you can't recycle folate for folate to do its function. You're going to have DNA issues and all of that related to a folate deficiency, even if it's just a B12 deficiency. But the B12 deficiency on its own is also needed to break down or degrade odd chain fatty acids. And if those accumulate, you will have neurological issues. So this is just showing what it does. Here is recycling folate. So essentially, here's folate, and in order for folate to be recycled, for its methylation to occur again, it needs B12. So recycling folate is this first one here. And this is just showing the breakdown of odd chain fatty acids. Remember, we convert them into succinyl-CoA. If we can't do this, then we're going to have accumulation of these odd chain fatty acids. So two functions, recycled folate and is needed for generation of healthy nerve tissue. Oh, and here's the picture of what cobalamin looks like. So here you see cobalt in the middle. I won't ever show you the structure and say, identify this. But you should know that it's the only vitamin that has cobalt. That's why we call it cobalt. But it's a really large, cool structure. All right, so these are some characteristics of B12 that is going to be important to remember. IF. IF stands for intrinsic factor. You definitely want to remember this guy. If you don't make intrinsic factor, which by the way we make in the stomach, in order to absorb B12 in the small intestine. The thing is, as we get older, we tend to make less intrinsic factor, which means as we get older, like my mother, we tend to become more B12 deficient if we're not careful. And so IF is really important in order to ensure that you're actually being able to absorb B12 from food. So intrinsic factor is made in the stomach, and it allows us to absorb B12 in the intestine. If you don't have IF, you can't absorb B12, which means you end up with a B12 deficiency. It's going to be called pernicious anemia. So if it's anemia related to a B12 deficiency, we call it pernicious anemia. We can still call it megaloblastic because it's called pernicious when it's B12, but it's still a megaloblastic anemia. This is in my slides later. Alright. So here's another interesting thing about B12. So first interesting thing, it needs B12 for absorption. Second interesting thing, it is synthesized only by microorganisms. So we can become deficient rather quickly. I remember when I was learning, I actually had some good instructors at the Line of College Institute at Oregon State. And one of them told us that apes, monkeys, they are similar to us. They don't really get B12 in their diet. And they are plants. They eat only plants. So B12, we do tend to get it from animal foods because it is in animal foods. But if you're eating plant foods, we don't really get it because it doesn't, it's not in the plant foods. It's made by the bacteria. And so apes, monkeys, they eat their own feces. And that is actually how they can maintain their B12 levels. But humans, we don't eat our own feces. And so we do have to think about B12 as far as where we're getting it in So it's not present in plants. It is made by the microbial synthesis in the gut of animals, and that's why we do have it when we consume animal products. But we do have it in fermented foods, so if you are vegetarian or vegan, nutritional yeast, chem cheese, but it's in a wide amount of animal foods. It's also imported by cereal. So there is lots of ways to get it in your diet. And honestly, kind of worry about it too, but it's not based on any kind of research or studies. But I kind of think just like vitamin K, that we probably do absorb some if we have a very healthy gut. And I think there's that potential, but there's no evidence of that. But remember our microorganisms also make vitamin K, and that we can absorb. So I'm like, why can't we absorb B12 too? Maybe it is possible, but no one's discovered that we're doing it yet. Just think about that. Anyway, it goes back to IF. That's actually why we absorb vitamin K and not B12 because of the IF. But I don't know. And that be something that scientists can do. Because there are vegans and vegetarians out there that I know are not getting. It's based on things that I've seen. Anyway, here's IF in the stomach. So it's made in the stomach, and it allows us. This IF is going to bind to B12, and that's how we can absorb it in the intestine. So again, intrinsic factor is specific for B12. You got to make intrinsic factor in order for us to absorb B12. Deficiency. So we know its functions. We know its interesting characteristics. It needs IF. It's only made by microorganisms. We don't really have it in plant foods. Deficiency concerns. So we do, the B12 deficiency is common-ish relative to some of the others, in part because we don't have it in a wide array of foods, especially if it's vegetarian or vegan. So deficiency does cause that megaloblastic macrocytic anemia, and that's because folate cannot be recycled properly. So you have the same deficiency as a folate deficiency. When you cannot recycle folate, then you essentially are not just B12 deficient, but you're lowering the amounts of folate in your body too if you can't recycle it. So this specifically, if it's due to a B12 deficiency, though, we call it pernicious anemia. Versus those people who cannot make intrinsic factor are usually the ones that end up with pernicious anemia. Those are the ones that are most commonly deficient. So elderly, most commonly deficient in B12 because they tend to make some elderly, not all, but some tend to make less IF as they get older. And this is the concern. If you are B12 deficient, you can end up with neurological dementia-like symptoms related to that B12 deficiency because you're not making, you have accumulation of odd chain fatty acids that should be in your nervous tissue. So your nervous tissue will not be as healthy, and that can cause neurological issues. And symptoms may be here because this is another interesting characteristic of B12. It is one of, I'm going through them in my head. It is the only B vitamin that we store in the liver. B12 is the only water-soluble vitamin that we store in the liver. That is something you want to remember. B12 is the only water-soluble vitamin, because I told you water-soluble we don't tend to store. But I think because B12 is one of those that's not in a wide array of foods, our bodies have evolved, our human machines have evolved to hold on to that one more strongly, and so we do have a way to store B12 in the liver. And so it can take a long time before you see B12 deficiency. Yeah. And I don't think it's stored in adipose, as far as I know. But yeah, the lipid-soluble vitamins tend to be either or. So like vitamin E and K are stored anywhere lipids are stored. But I don't think B12 is. I think it's specifically just stored in the liver. So if a person has macrocytic anemia, so if that's the only endpoint, the data point that you have, you need to figure out first if it's folate deficiency or B12 deficiency. Because what happens if someone has macrocytic anemia caused by B12 deficiency and you give them folate?
It masks the
Does
symptoms.
the anemia go away if you give
It masks the
them
symptoms.
back folate, even though it's B12 deficiency? Does the anemia go away? what are the consequences? You will still have neurological issues. So that's why the folate UL was set. Remember, folate has a UL, and its upper limit was set. It's actually 1 milligram or 1,000 micrograms. But this upper limit was set so that you won't disguise a B12 deficiency. So that's why we recommend not taking too much folate, because if you take too much folate, it could disguise a B12 deficiency. That is exactly why a UL was set for folate, not because folate itself is toxic, but because of the concern that it might disguise a B12 deficiency. And then someone's going to end up with neurological issues, which to me is more problematic than anemia. Anemia, we can fix that. But neurological issues, that gets a little dangerous. So pernicious anemia, again, this is really related to a B12 deficiency. It's usually caused by a lack of intrinsic factor, and the person could also have neurological symptoms. So what happens if the therapy, what happens if someone does have a B12 deficiency? If they lack IF, if they are no longer getting IF, I think my mom is still getting injections because you have to bypass the GI tract. Actually, no, there's a supplement now that you can put under the tongue. Do I have that on here? There's a supplement that she can put under the tongue and actually it be absorbed that way. But otherwise, in the beginning, she was given B12 deficiencies. When she was so low, they needed to bring her numbers back up quickly. But keep in mind, if someone doesn't have IF, then you can't just give them an oral supplement because they don't have the IF, it won't be absorbed. And so you have to bypass the GI tract by giving them injections. There are some other possibilities of ways to get it into their body. But it is going to be bypassing so this is intramuscular, that's what IM stands for. Other ways, because you have to bypass the GI tract if they're not making IF. And again, important to distinguish if it's folate or B12 deficiency, because B12 folate supplementation can mask the B12 deficiency. But there's no UL for B12. Consuming too much B12, that was the one that on the 5-hour energy drink had upwards of 8,000% over the RDA. So far, we haven't seen any real official toxicity symptoms related to that, but who knows? All right, so folate and B12, again, function, deficiencies, toxicities, and any interesting characteristics that are related to that. Like B12, the only water-soluble vitamin that we store in the liver. You should remember that. You should remember IF. So those are some things I want you to remember when you're studying the vitamins. Just the really pertinent stuff. If you want to go into the details, go for it, and I can help you with those. But I'm just sticking with what are the main functions and deficiencies and toxicities. All right, vitamin C. Where we at? Vitamin C. So you should also know the scientific names for all of them. So folate is pentahydrofolate. B12 is cobalamin. Vitamin C is ascorbic acid or ascorbate. So I call it either or depending on what it is doing. Ascorbate, ascorbic acid, when it's donated its electron, is ascorbic acid. When it gets an electron, it's ascorbate. Either or, you should just know both of these terms mean vitamin C. It's found in plants. So all other animals can make vitamin C. We just lack an enzyme. So we can't make vitamin C. Otherwise, vitamin C would be essential. My dogs can make vitamin C if they don't need it in their diet. The only animals, I think it's humans and guinea pigs. I always forget, maybe well too. But humans and guinea pigs cannot make their own vitamin C. You have to get it from the diet. So you can see that humans evolved to eat plants. Because the only place you find vitamin C, or really get vitamin C, is in plants. And what plants? So citrus is the main place, green foods, berries, lots of good foods contain vitamin C. Also known as ascorbic acid. So its functions. It has two functions I need you to know. One is coenzyme in hydroxylation reactions. And you guys already learned this. So think about it for one. So collagen. Collagen, the most abundant protein in the body, is present in your connective tissue. Without vitamin C, you cannot hydroxylate proline or lysine, which means you cannot make vitamins. You cannot make collagen. So you have to have vitamin C to make collagen. And that's because it's a coenzyme in these hydroxylation reactions that essentially is helping move hydroxyl groups in order to produce collagen. So you're hydroxylating protein and hydroxylating lysine. You can't do that without vitamin C. And this other one here. So again, hydroxylation reaction. I'm not so concerned that you remember this, but it is good to know that it's not just collagen. There's other enzymes that require hydroxylation by vitamin C. So in order to make dopamine and norepinephrine, you also need vitamin C. It's probably an important function, but a lesser one that I don't care. This is not what I'll ask you on the exam. But you do need to know about collagen. Vitamin C, really pertinent for making collagen. And also you should know the second function is antioxidant. Vitamin C is an exogenous, meaning we get it from our diet. We don't have to make it. In fact, we can't make it. It's an exogenous antioxidant. And it's water soluble. In other words, it's going to be working in the water soluble portions of your cell, and that's going to be compared to vitamin E, we'll get to later, also an antioxidant. The difference between vitamin E and vitamin C is vitamin E is a lipid. So it's going to be a lipid antioxidant. It's going to help remove free radicals from lipids, whereas vitamin C is going to do it from the watery portions of your cell. And this last thing I'm going to add in here, because this, again, might be on your boards, and it's a really well-known nutritional thing to remember, is that non-heme iron, we're going to talk about iron probably on Monday, whenever we on Tuesday, but non-heme iron is necessary for absorbing iron from plants. So in order to properly absorb iron from plants, it's called the non-heme iron. Vitamin C will assist with that. Yeah. Exogenous means that you don't have to make it, you get it from your diet. So exogenous, vitamin E and vitamin C are exogenous antioxidants, we get it from the diet, versus the other antioxidant I hope you guys learned, cysteine is a really important component of this, it's glutathione. So glutathione was an endogenous antioxidant. Your body can make glutathione. So it's an antioxidant your body makes versus one that you get from the diet. So just know that vitamin C will help reduce iron, and that helps it be more absorbable from your diet, especially when the iron is coming from plants. Right, this is the structure. So you can see the hydroxyl groups. It can move hydroxyl groups, and that's why it's really good for these hydroxylation reactions, because it can actually donate hydroxyl groups to lysine, donate a hydroxyl group to proline, and that way you can make collagen. Deficiency, scurvy. Oh wow, it's Latin studies. Because I remember stories that some people would say. So I think I already told you the story about Linnaeus. The British sailors called Linnaeus because they went out to sea with lines, and that protected them from scurvy. So scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency, and you see a lot of connective tissue issues related to the fact that they don't make proper collagen. So scurvy is related to the fact that you can't make collagen if you don't have enough vitamin C. So you get spongy gums, loose teeth, fragile blood vessels. I think I have a picture. Here you go. Collagen. So this is scurvy. This is a slight manifestation of it. So you can see here that you're having connective tissue issues here. This is obviously a really bad case of scurvy. So poor wound filling, all of it's relating to the fact that you can't make collagen very well. You may have anemia due to a iron deficiency, but I wouldn't worry about that one. And people, Linus Pauling, But really, scientists have not found a link between curing the common cold and taking extra vitamin C. He also thought that it would help with heart disease, cancer. So really, clinical trials haven't really shown that vitamin C supplementation will result in lower risk. But who knows? Maybe he was right. So again, deficiency is scurvy. There is no toxicity, but we do have a UL because too much. If you take excessive amounts, and a lot of people do, but some people, this excessive amount, depending on how much they take, can cause gastrointestinal issues related to the walking doses. But there's no toxicity in and of itself. It's just gastrointestinal issues that have a lot of vitamin C and GI tract. So there is a UL, but not really super toxic vitamin C as far as we know. The deficiency, there's definitely a deficiency, and that primary disease is ulcer. Okay. Any questions about vitamin C? All right. So this one you already know some about it, vitamin B6. So this has a few names. So pyridoxine, pyridoxal, pyridoxamine. You see these are all slightly different structures, but they're all vitamin B6. So just recognize that term, pyridoxal, pyridoxine, that's vitamin B6. And this is another one that we tend to just call vitamin B6. So, yeah. And we do find it in plants, also in animal foods. So this one we find in a variety of food sources, so it's not usually that much of a concern. The most active form, so the active form in the body, you should know this term, you've seen it before, pyridoxal phosphate. It is needed in this form for over 100 enzymes. Lots of enzymes need vitamin B6 as pyridoxal phosphate. And we know it because transamination, we didn't talk about it as much, but it's also needed for deamination, decarboxylation. This is the key takeaway. Amino acid metabolism, and specifically transamination. You should definitely know this because we've talked about transamination reactions already requiring pyridoxal phosphate. But also know that it's needed for other stuff too, other enzymes and other energy pathways. So this one's glycogenolysis. But this one that I underlined is the most important one that I really want you to remember. And I also want you to remember 100 enzymes. That's a lot of stuff going on. So really important for the function of a lot of pathways. I'm keeping it simple for you guys, but just understand it's a lot of enzymes are reliant on vitamin B6. They should definitely remember it's required for transamination reactions in amino acid metabolism. But other pathways needed as well. So it is in lots of foods. Don't memorize the foods. Find it in a lot of foods. But we do have deficiency symptoms. So if someone doesn't have enough vitamin B6, so they do have skin inflammation, they can have neurological issues too, depression, confusion, anemia. Again, 100 different enzymes or more reliant on vitamin B6. You're going to have a variety of issues all over the place related to a B6 deficiency. Definitely see it with alcoholism, not just because they're on a poor diet, but they also have difficulty absorbing nutrients. So it's poor diet and they have an issue absorbing nutrients when someone drinks too much. So, but again, we don't tend to see a lot of deficiencies related to B6 because we don't usually see people that deficient in vitamin B6. Yeah. for, not for, oh wait, is it in this one? Do I have it in there? Oh yeah, I do, good. Like, yeah, so that's, yeah, all your B vitamins, that thiamine, when we get to it, we'll talk about that one specifically, because that one has more serious related to alcoholism. All right, but I do want to finish this before we move on. So I'm going to finish with the toxicity related to vitamin B6. So this is one of those, remember, these haven't been very toxic. Folate, not really toxic, but we don't want to have, this guy's a B12 deficiency. B12, no UL, we don't think it's toxic. Vitamin C, not really toxic, but if we have a UL because of gastrointestinal issues. B6, we have toxicity. So this is an interesting characteristic of B6 we're not seeing in the other water-soluble vitamins. So this is why you want to remember this. So B6, oh, people are guinea pigs. B6 is unique among the water-soluble vitamins for having significant toxicity. Essentially, it's neuropathy. What happened was, it was touted as a cure for PMS, premenstrual syndrome. So essentially, women with PMS, they were told B6 is going to cure your PMS, and so women were taking large doses of B6, and it turned out that these women ended up with irreversible nerve damage. Essentially, they started having neuropathy, lack of feeling in their fingers and their limbs. Essentially, they didn't have but a sensory neuropathy. Essentially, they lost sensation. So, and it was irreversible for them. And that is the danger of too much B6. Chronically take it over time, you can end up with some sort of sensory neuropathy, the inability to properly sense your neurons have damage. They can't feel what's going on around them. So, again, something interesting about B6, if you take too much, there is a UL set because of, that's how we figure out sometimes things are toxic, is because people just decide to take walking doses of something, and they are guinea pigs in and of themselves, and we learn from that. So we learn a lot of that by trial and error. And unfortunately, this one was a hard one to learn because it's one thing, B12 results in neurological issues, but those are reversible. I'm sure if it's really, really severe B12 for long periods of time, it might become irreversible. So it really depends on how long you do it. I haven't actually looked at this study on these women that did take these large doses and how much they took for how long. But it does make it clear that sometimes toxicity symptoms are obvious, and this is one where it's obvious. All right, so I'm going to end on that one though. I'm going to dive into this